Welcome to Journeys with the No Schedule Man, exploring authentic stories of personal growth and lessons learned from people living true to themselves with creativity, passion, and purpose. For all past episodes, subscribe on iTunes or visit noscheduleman.com. And please connect, share, and contribute with a comment, rating, or review. And now, here's your host, the No Schedule Man, Kevin Bulmer.
I've been known to struggle with reality. It's not that it is any real mystery.
The question this week is, what are you afraid of? We are going to dive deeply into that today and give you some tools to overcome it. Welcome. I'm Kevin Bulmer. This is Journeys with the No Schedule Man, helping to create positive change by exploring and sharing authentic conversations on personal and professional growth. You can find all past episodes of this podcast worldwide on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, and at noschedulemanpodcast.com. And if you're in the United States, you can find it on iHeartRadio or Google Play Music, as well as the other channels that I mentioned. If you'd like to continue the conversation and have daily access to me, I invite you to join me in my online coaching community. It's called the Turtle Tribe, and it's a place where you'll get daily coaching, hints, tips, encouragement, empowerment, and creative collaboration. It is a membership-based community. There's a free 7-day trial, so you can ensure it's a good fit for you. You'll find everything you need at theturtletribe.com. theturtletribe.com. We would love to have you. It's a pretty special place. Today we kick off the third season of this podcast with Sue Curr, who helps people to fear less and live more through a variety of activities, including keynote speaking, coaching, and a bunch of different seminars and workshops. Now, this is Sue's second time joining me on this program, and I encourage you to go back and listen to episode 23, her first appearance, where Sue goes into great detail about the first 50 years or so of her life, her descension into mental ill health, and near-fatal bout with alcoholism. Having survived the trauma of her past, Sue set about rebuilding her life, and what you're going to hear today is the result, and it's profound. Among the key takeaways that stood out from my time with Sue today include, number one, fear gives us an excuse. And when Sue talked about this, I was doing an inventory mentally of some of the things that I know I'm afraid of, and she's right. I remember reading The Magic of Thinking Big by David J. Schwartz. I recommend you go and pick it up. And right near the front of that book, he talks about something called excusitis, and asking you to be honest about the things that you're using as an excuse. Your health, your surroundings, your financial situation, anything like that. Well, fear is a pretty good excuse, and Sue talks about that, and I think it's an important lesson to hear. Listen for that. Number two, she says fear plays an enormous trick on us. It's the stories that we tell ourselves that lead us into trouble. And many times we're not actually afraid of what we think we're afraid of. We can only find that out by actually facing it. Now, Sue gives a great example of that, but let me unpack that for a second. It's the stories that we tell ourselves that lead us into trouble. Another way of phrasing that would be limiting beliefs. If you can think of whatever fear you have as a story that you're telling yourself, well, then you can start to separate yourself from it and ask whether or not it's true. Number three, want to live large? Get uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. People who have and enjoy success in a lot of areas of their lives come to find out that they're just always pushing the edge of their comfort zone. When you're just settling back and you feel completely at ease and comfortable all the time when you're not growing. There's a reason why they call it growing pains. You don't want to be reckless, but at least in terms of pushing yourself a little bit, get uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. I call it dancing with discomfort, and Sue has found the same thing. Number four, Sue talked about saying yes to opportunity and to possibility and looking at herself as worthy of that possibility. Listen for that. Number five, looking at life through the eyes of a child. And Sue says she's now just about 6 years old. That's one of my favorite things that came up the first time Sue joined me on the podcast in episode 23. At that time, she talked about just being 4. I won't say any more than that now. Listen for that context later in the conversation. Number 6, Sue mentioned that the truly wealthy are the people who know the value of love and gratitude. Didn't say anything about money, although that's certainly nice and in cases necessary to have. But love and gratitude really makes one wealthy. Number 7, fear is born when we attach emotional pain to a significant memory. I'm going to say that one again and ask you to really consider it. Fear is born when we attach emotional pain to a significant memory. I don't know about you, but when Sue mentioned that, it really made me think and to cast my mind and my emotions back on different experiences and what thoughts, feelings, fears, excuses perhaps I may have attached to those experiences and the memories that have now come with them. There's a lot of responsibility that comes in that statement. I'll leave it at that for now and encourage you to listen for when Sue brings that up in the conversation. Now, the last time that she and I spoke, Sue was just about 6 months away from literally tossing herself out of an airplane, which she chose to do to confront her fear of heights. And I thought that seemed like as good a place as any to start. So that's what we did. Here's Sue Curr on overcoming fear on Journeys with the No Schedule Man. Sue, I'd like to start somewhat where we left off almost a year and a half ago when we last spoke, and that is to ask you to take me to the edge of the airplane, up however many thousand feet in the air that you were at that time, and describe for me thoughts, emotions, feelings, fears. What was it like?
Oh, my goodness. I can't believe it's that long, firstly, since we spoke. It seems to have just been yesterday, but that moment on the side of the aeroplane, did I feel fear? No. I was exhilarated. Bearing in mind, I booked it. I did the free fall tandem skydive in April last year, so that was 2017. But I booked it in not long after we spoke last. Actually, I booked it in the October, and my family spent 6 months trying to talk me out of it because they knew in inverted commas that I wouldn't do it. But they'd not bargained on the fact that I'd done a whole mindset job on myself prior to booking, and I continued to do it until the minute I sat on the edge of that aeroplane. And in all honesty, I was so excited. I could hardly breathe, but it was excitement because I now know that the body doesn't realise that fear or excitement exist. They just know that you're in that heightened state, and it's the mind that puts the connotation of fear or excitement on that because it's the same physiological reaction. Yeah, the cortisol and the dopamine and everything that's getting dumped in your bloodstream, it's the exact same chemical reaction that happens for fear situations and excited situations, and it's us that put a label on it. How bizarre is that? So I decided to accept the excitement for what it was until I looked down, and I saw my shoes, and I realised, split second before I was launched in this tandem parachute, that I'd not changed my shoes. And the thought as I went over the side of the plane, in all honesty, was, I'm going to lose my shoes. Because I'd got shoes on that weren't tied on, essentially. They were slip-ons. The shoes survived, as did I. And we free fell. There was a moment as I came out of the plane where literally, because the guy that was my instructor who was jumping with me, he was a good foot taller than I am, and considerably heavier, add the weight to the parachute. And as we tipped out the plane, we literally went into a Superman nosedive. So I was head first. And at that point, I was quite Latin, I have to be honest. There were a few Latin expletives because I wasn't expecting it. I think naively I expected just to go out like belly first, as you see in the pose that's on the photograph that I use these days. And what happened was a Superman type bullet dive for maybe 2 or 3 seconds before he pulled like a weight that righted us, as in put us horizontal. And at that point, at the point of being horizontal, we free fell for 6,000 feet at 120 miles per second. I can't even begin to describe it. I couldn't. He said to me, whatever you do, keep your mouth shut. All the photographs that I had taken, because there's somebody jumped with us, look as though I'm smiling. And that's me not being able to do anything with my face. I couldn't get my lips closed because of the G-force. So it actually looks as though I'm smiling, and what I'm doing is trying not to breathe in through my mouth. And we free fell for 6,000 feet, which was incredibly exhilarating. We were spinning, we were turning, and it's a sensation that I would repeat in an instant if I had the chance. If I could miss the Superman nosedive first, I would repeat that experience because the guy that was jumping with me was a very talented jumper, and the guy that was filming was equally as experienced and talented, and they just made the whole process seamless. But when he pulled the ripcord for the shoot, what I'd not factored in either was that the process of the chute going out would drag us back up into the air by 1,000 feet at the same speed that we'd come down in. My ears popped for a start. But once the chute had opened, it was just calm. It was as calm as it had previously been exciting. And I suddenly realised at that point that I hadn't been scared of heights. I'd always said to anybody, the reason I did it was to prove that I wasn't scared of heights. And in the moment of that parachute opening, I realised that actually it wasn't the height that I was bothered about, because I'd been able to sit in a plane and look out of it and not be scared. It was hitting the ground at 500 mile an hour without a parachute that had bothered me. And I survived the free fall. And once the parachute was open, in all honesty, we came down very gently. We were the last in a group of 6 to jump. And he learnt me how to guide the parachute. You've seen the James Bond film where James Bond actually he's pulling the levers on the parachute to make him go to where he wants to go. He got me doing that and so on, and I just had an absolute ball. And we were up there, in actual fact, when the parachute opened, we were up there for about 10 minutes, I think, which is a long time when you're just dangling at the end of a piece of silk, I tell you. But I absolutely loved it. I loved it. And I managed to raise, I think it was just shy of £600 for Mind, the mental health charity over here, which was sort of my reason, if you like, for doing it. And it was my way of giving something back. But I had a ball. I loved it.
I'm really interested that you noted that in going through the experience, which you put yourself through to overcome a fear of one thing, you found that, in fact, that wasn't what the actual fear was of it all. How congruent is that with the experiences that you've had in other areas of your life and what you see from other people that you're now meeting with the other work you're doing?
Well, funnily enough, and one of the ladies, I go to a couple of ladies' networking groups in England, in Sheffield, where I live, and the owner of one of them said to me several months afterwards, "I'm so glad you did that jump." And I said, "So am I." And she went, "No, you don't understand. We've seen a difference in you since that day." And I said to her, the reason being, I think, is because the reason why she's evidenced a difference in myself. I'd not recognised it, I don't think, or at least not taken on board that other people had evidenced it. But I think what changed in me was I knew then, that day, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that the fears that we have in our lives only ever have the power over us that we choose to give it. Much like the past, it's fears and emotion, and we're in control of our emotions. And because I'd overcome a fear that actually I came later to understand didn't exist, as in it wasn't I'd take my eye off the ball. It wasn't I had a fear, but the fear was falling out of an aeroplane and hitting the floor and being sort of smashed into pieces. I'd put the wrong label on my fear, and it led me down a path where I sort of started to write more about that side of it, and it became a model that I now work by. The Fear Less, Live More model, if you like, is a series of workshops and keynotes that I do, which talks extensively about the stories we tell ourselves. I think we touched on it briefly last time, but the stories we tell ourselves get us into trouble. And whilst the story I told myself about being afraid of heights never really got me into trouble, it was something that bothered me and I needed to get it out of my system. But what I'd found in the process leading up to the actual jump was the more I exercised my courage muscle, the more that expanded, for a start, but the more my fear muscle, using them as metaphorics, the more my fear muscle receded. And eventually courage overcame fear and I did the jump, only to discover that I was mistaken in the first place. But that reinforced what I now know to be a fact, that fear plays an enormous trick on us because we allow it to. We buy into the story we tell ourselves. I can't throw myself out of that in an aeroplane. My family spent 6 months saying, you can't throw yourself out of there. You're scared to death of heights. I told them often enough that I was, so they believed me. But more importantly, I believed myself. And I knew somehow on a deep level, I knew that I had to challenge myself on that. The result was surprising. I expected, in all honesty, to be able to say to people, I'm not scared of heights anymore because I've just thrown myself 16,000 feet in total is how far we fell, how far we jumped. And I later found out it was the highest jump in England. There isn't one higher than that for free falling and parachute tandem dives. But it was proof where it needed for me that the story of my life, the journey that I had up to that point, it was a reinforcing of the fact that the story I'd been telling myself up to that point, I'd also taken my eye off the ball. My whole life, I'd been blaming somebody else for my mental health, which, as we both know, descended into addiction. And it was a summation of my hanging my mental health on the hook of somebody else. And when my mental health triggered an addiction and I nearly drank myself to death, I hung that on the hook of my mental health, which was on somebody else's hook. So it wasn't my fault. And it unraveled all this series of self-discovery, if you like, that this, since we last spoke, has led to me achieving a sense of far more clarity and focus, I think, Kevin, than I've ever had in my entire life, ever. Because today, when we all have this inner diatribe, don't we? We speak to ourselves all the time, whether we evidence it by speaking out loud or we're talking to ourselves in our head. Do we not all? We can't do that. If I do this, then this will happen. And I bought into it for so long. But what I now know, without a doubt, and especially on back of the tandem dive, was that the reason that we blame fear for not doing things is it gives us an excuse. If we tell somebody we are afraid of, if we have the courage to say, no, I can't do that because I'm afraid of it, that's acceptable to society. But what we're doing in our own lives, in our own mind, if you like, is we're giving ourselves an excuse. And the excuse that we're giving ourselves is by way of a reason, in inverted commas, to stay very firmly safe inside our comfort zone. Because whilst whatever the situation is that's caused us to want to stay inside a comfort zone, something that we are fearful of on the outside, we're pretty sure that's worse. So to use the skydive analogy, I'm all right while I'm sat in an aeroplane, but if I jump out, what's going to happen to me when I jump out is far worse than me being sat inside the aeroplane. I've now applied those principles to my life. And I now step outside my comfort zone every day. I challenge myself every day in some way, even with little things. I don't want to pick the phone up and ring so-and-so because I've not spoke to her for a long time and she's going to think I don't love her or I've ignored her or whatever. These little tiny stories that we tell ourselves every single day without even knowing it. And then suddenly it becomes a fact. And then we daren't pick the phone up. These days I don't, because I know that I'm trying to stay inside my comfort zone. Because as much as I might be worried and upset, for instance, that somebody I'm not spoken to for a long time might be cross at me or not want to speak to me anymore, my own fear, my imaginary fear, is far more acceptable than possibly being right. If that makes any sense. If, sort of the fear that we're experiencing, the situations that we experience inside our comfort zone, as bad as they are at times, are preferable to the unknown fear that awaits us outside. And what I now know for a fact is that the only thing that is missing, the missing link, if you like, between our fear that's keeping us rooted and where we want to be, regardless of the situation, the only bit that's missing is knowledge. And the only way we can get the knowledge is to actually do the act. In my case, in this instance, skydiving. And it opened up a completely different school of thought, which I now apply straight across my life. I can't even begin to tell you how much it's changed me.
It's interesting to me to hear you describe all this because you were already well on your way in terms of fear less, live more. In other words, I think I would say, Sue, I mean, you knew, I mean, you wouldn't even have gotten onto the airplane and out into the air, into the Superman bullet dive, if you hadn't recognized the power that fear had and the excuses and all of the detail that you just shared. And yet, by continuing to dive deeper into it, it sounds like you just continue to get a deeper understanding. So, I mean, you can know a thing, but then the more you approach it, you know it even more deeply. Do you see what I'm getting at here?
Absolutely. I think the last time we spoke, Kevin, even at that stage, sort of 16 months or so ago, I remember saying to you that these days I liken processes, you know, like sort of moving from a fixed mindset, for instance, to a growth mindset is a bit like peeling back the layers of an onion. I remember using that term before. I just didn't realize at that point how many layers there were to the onions that are our lives, basically. You know, the layer, we can peel back layer after layer after layer and think that we've got to the root of all evil, to the root cause of whatever our issues are. But when we dig a little bit deeper, we find out that actually we took our eye off the ball. I took my eye off the ball when it came to coming out of an aeroplane. And when I thought about it afterwards, I'd spent so many years traveling the world, sitting in an aeroplane, looking down at the atlas that was beneath my feet. And it didn't bother me. And I never connected the dots. I didn't. And yeah, I think it's safe to say that in life, now, the difference in me now from today to 16 months ago is evident for everybody that knows me, that sees me. And I actually can say hand on heart, I would have said to you, in fact, I'm sure I did 16 or so months ago, I am a fearless person. I think, in all honesty, today, I can say to you, I am a fearless person, and I know without a shadow of a doubt that I am a far less fearless, far less fearful person, I should say, than I was 16 months ago. But at that point in my life, 16 months ago, I was a much improved version of the one that had got me to that point. So, like anything, if anything else, it's reinforced the fact, as we both know, that every single day is a learning process, and we are all of us, without exception, we are all of us works in progress. Every single day of our lives, we are works in progress. And we will learn something every day if we're open to the prospect. And it's usually about ourselves, if we're even more self-aware. And I think that's the key. I think today I am a far more self-aware person than I was even 16 months ago. And 16 months ago, I would have said that wasn't possible. So my message would be, you know, be careful, because if you think you've got to where you are, then and this is how far you're going to be, you're wrong. I put a post on social media a little while ago. If you think you've learned enough, learn some more. If you think you've gone far enough, travel a bit further, that type of thing. And I ended it by saying, look at a tree. Have you ever seen a tree grow to half the height it could? The answer is no. Because the tree doesn't know any different, nor do the plants. They grow. They just keep growing. They adapt and they thrive to their environment. And that's where I now know, certainly for me, and I think for a large part of the human race, to be fair, that's where we take our eye off the ball. We reach our adulthood years and we think, that's it. I've done my education. This is it. This is me. We don't have to stop. We don't ever have to stop. And I think it's imperative that people understand that, because life, I seem to remember saying to you 16 months ago, then I knew the difference between surviving and thriving. And now that's moved up a level. I'm thriving for sure on many levels, physically, emotionally, mentally, all that business. But living now, I thrive every single day. But I live my life every single day on a level that hitherto, or pre-skydive, I hadn't. I thought I had, but it came to the knowledge that came with it, if you like, took me to the next level, which is it's just an amazing place to be, because it can be a blessing and a curse, actually, because I see things that other people go, they go, really? Stop. you know.
Well, you've led me to where I wanted to take you next, which is what goes on inside of you. How does it feel when you are with people, speaking, coaching, workshops, seminars, who are in their own version of where you were, buried in excuses, alcoholism, nearly dead from trying to bury fear and all the other things that we spoke in detail about the first time that we talked. Knowing what you know now and remembering how you were, but knowing that's possible, what goes on inside of you when you're with those other people who are currently in that place that you used to be in?
I think it's fair to say, and just to be clear, that not everybody I deal with are addicts or have issues in that area, but the vast majority of people that sit in front of me, whether it's a personal client or a workshop or if I'm speaking at a seminar or whatever, they are there because they have issues with their mindset and probably their mental health, which is intertwined in some way. But if I'm sat inside my head looking out at my audiences and at my clients and so on like that, I like to see the whites of people's eyes. I like to be able to look into somebody's soul and let them know that I feel their pain. And that sounds quite evangelical at times, I guess. And I don't mean it to sound that way or patronising even, but I think it's important. I've learned a lot this last 16 months, Kevin, and one is that in allowing myself to be seen to be vulnerable, it helps other people to identify their own issues. So when I speak, I make a point of making eye contact. And when I do my own workshops and so on like that, and I'll say to people all the time, get comfortable with being uncomfortable because that's my job. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing worse. There's nothing worse than a reformed drinker, smoker, gambler that would turn it on its head and goes, no, you don't want to do it like that. I did it like that and it nearly killed me. That is okay for a certain length of time, but you need to be able to turn that practical element of your survival into something that you can pay forward. And I like to think that that's what I've done. And the feedback that I get from people is very kind, and it's tremendously reassuring that the people seem to get, in inverted commas, what I say. But for me, I can honestly say in the last 16 months, I haven't worked a day in my life. I haven't in the last 16 months. I get up every single day, and whether it's talking to people like yourself or writing or workshopping or personal clients, I love it with such a passion, because not only am I giving a message out that people are taking on board, and I can evidence it. I can evidence that the people I'm working with, they are putting these strategies into place in their own lives, and that gives me a real warm, fuzzy feeling, which is actually worth more than any money, because I'm passionate about helping people to understand that actually, however bad they think their lives are, there's always hope. And I've been told that I come across as being very authentic when I'm speaking in public, and people warm to it. And for me, forget the paycheck. Seriously, forget the paycheck. It's worth it to see it in somebody's eyes when they get it. And even more so when they contact you privately afterwards, or they call you up, or they send you a text message and tell you what a difference you're making in their lives. I've found my purpose in life, Kevin. And again, that sounds a bit OTT, but I really do truly believe that I found my purpose in life. And that makes me feel great. And it just makes me want to continue to do it day in, day out. And whilst other people want to hear it, it being the message that whoever and whatever we are enough, and I can prove it. And I use my story, if you like, my journey, as touchstones. I take people on a journey of their own self-discovery through showing them my journey. And it's not a look at me, this is what happened to me, or woe is me. This is like, these are my touchstones. When this happened to me, wow, this happened. And incrementally, what happens is every time you get a wow moment, you expose yourself to more opportunity for even more wow moments. And life is good, because at the minute, don't get me wrong, I'm human, just like you. We have good days, we have bad days, we have really awful days sometimes. But I know that every single day is sent now for me to learn something largely about myself. And if I can pass that forward so that it helps somebody else not to suffer in the same way, then I'm a happy bunny.
So what are some of the things more specifically over the last 16 months, year and a half or so, that come to mind that you have done and experienced, or maybe even more specifically, some of the ways that you challenged yourself in the time since you jumped out the airplane that you may not have otherwise, and what happened as a result?
I decided, round about the time that I decided to do the tandem skydive, so 6 months prior to it happening, so that would have been, 18 months or so ago, and I decided, I just got up one day, and as good as life was, I knew that something was missing. And I realised that I was still reticent about saying yes to opportunity. I was looking for opportunities to have a good day, opportunities to look through the window of opportunity, not fear. But I suddenly realised that I wasn't saying yes to opportunity. I wasn't saying yes to the fact that I'm possible. And that took my journey of self-discovery down a different route. So I said, for instance, I went this last 12 months, so 2017, I did the tandem skydive on the 28th of April. A week later, on the 7th, 8th of May, I flew to India for a week because I did a podcast recording for a lady called Susan Ball, who lives in Nova Scotia. And she remembered during a chance conversation that I'd said I wanted to go to India in my life plan. I got a random email from her some months later saying, "Do you still want to go to India?" I answered yes. I didn't second guess it. I didn't think, what's this about or anything like that. I just emailed her back and said yes. And then I read the email, which was an invite to speak at a conference that I went to in India. And in doing that, I mean, that was massive for me. I flew halfway around the world on my own, connecting flights and all that business, got delayed and had a massive adventure. And I just sat there and smiled because I was living the dream. I'd always wanted to go to India. And I had some trials and tribulations. And whilst I was there, I got an award and all sorts of things. Massive things happened. And I just decided that, I think it was Joseph Campbell said, a philosopher said, whatever you do, don't die with your bliss still inside you. And when I decided to say yes to opportunity and the opportunities that presented themselves, I just said, yeah, do you know what? I'm going to do that. So going to India would be one. I spoke at the World Forum Centre in The Hague. That would be another. You know, somebody asked me if I could do various, all sorts. There's too many. I'm sort of trying to pick them out of the air now, but too many little things that in and of themselves aren't massive. But in saying yes to the opportunity to do it, I'm planting seeds that are not only sprouting and making a difference for other people, self-belief, even though I actually think, oh, my self-belief's good. But I still have days where I have an imposter syndrome day. Like, oh man, they're going to find me out. I'm an imposter. No, I'm not, because this has happened. One day last week, I think there was a blog post. We had the blog post that I put on, the Facebook post that I put on. In one day, I'd not had anything happen other than me sort of doing productivity-inducing activities for quite a while. Planting seeds, as I call it, because I'm not getting discouraged, because I know I'm planting seeds literally all over the world. And in one day, you'd asked me to be on this podcast. Somebody else asked me to write an article for an addiction society in America, for instance. 5 different organisations got in touch and asked me to speak up and down the country in the UK. And I'm just like, wow. And this is because I said yes. I can't tell you the difference it made to my life. But also in knowing that, and because I'm stronger as a person, because saying yes prior to that would have got me into an awful lot of trouble. Because I would have said yes, 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 yes. And then when I got to the point of overload and overwhelm, would never have dared to say no. So these days, the difference is I now say, yeah, let me look at that. I can do that. But I'm strong enough as a person. I've grown as a person, strong enough to know that actually, if this is not for me, or if I've taken on too much, I'm going to say, actually, I can't do this just now. Can we rearrange, or can we just whatever? for me, in growing enough to be able to say yes and have the courage to change my mind, essentially, if I feel that I need to, I've not only grown as a person, but I've actually become more rounded in that I've become more emotionally intelligent when it comes to other people. So ordinarily, if I would have said yes to something, and not dared to back out, I would have delivered, but only half-heartedly, on a project or a talk or whatever. And other people that are investing their belief in me are not very often disappointed these days, shall we say, because I actually do now what it says on my tin. And on one of a good example of that would be, I was asked recently to to go and speak to a local head teacher of a school. Long story short, she needed help. The school needed help with regard to a year 6 group, or their year 6 stream, which are age 10 to 11. And they weren't coping with exam stress and all that. At 10 and 11, they're not coping with exam stress. Could I help her? And rather than say yes just for the paycheck, I said to her, that depends on your answer to my question. She said, aren't I supposed to be interviewing you? I said, absolutely. But these days, I'm operating from a point of pure intention, with authenticity. And I do what I do because I passionately believe that it makes a difference. But your answer to this question, which is, why do you want me to do this for your students, will be the deciding factor. And her answer was the one I wanted to hear, which was, I want these kids to be happy and healthy and whole. And if they can happen to pass a test, that's a bonus. I said yes. And nearly 12 months later, we're still working together and the kids are thriving. And for me, as you well know, it's far, far easier to raise a whole child than to mend a broken adult. And twice a week now, I get to work with a group of 30 kids who are thriving rather than surviving. And more importantly, I've got their parents and their educators on board, and I absolutely love it. I love it. And 18 months ago, I would have been sat here saying to you, in an ideal world, that's what I would like to be doing. But I don't think, have had the courage to do it. And now I do have the courage of my convictions, because I've seen that, not only have I seen that what I do works, but I have a self-belief that even 16 months ago, although I believed in myself, actually, in comparison to today, I don't think I did, to be fair. I still had far more imposter syndrome days than fearless days, even though I said, here I am, fear less, live more. But jumping out that aeroplane, I can't even begin to tell you. It just changed my life. It really did.
I'd like to go back to the part about planting seeds. I'm curious how all of these realizations about abandoning your excuses and overcoming fear, and what you learned even at a deeper level after going out of the airplane, how that plays into the act of planting seeds, and maybe more specifically what that means, and how that's maybe changed the kind of seeds that you now force yourself to plant.
I think, and again, it's a total mindset shift, in that when I first decided to make Fear Less, Live More a business, a model, if you like, in terms of growth mindset and emotional intelligence and everything, I'd very much got a business person's head on. I need to get X appointments a week, and I need to do this, this, and this to get this much in, to be able to do this, this, this. And what changed, and I wasn't aware that I was just operating, my modus operandi was business person. I'd never been self-employed before. I was just doing it. But what it suddenly dawned on me was that in planting the seeds that you're talking about, is actually these days, I will go and have a conversation with anybody about anything relevant, clearly in terms of their mindset or their issues or whatever, or their need for training provision. And more often than not, I find myself giving value regardless of whether or not I have a paycheck at the end of it. Because I now understand unequivocally that the more we give, the more we get. on every level. And I'm not talking about fiscal. I don't necessarily just mean money. But the more we give, the more we are giving of ourselves to others, then we reap the rewards on levels that we can only even begin to imagine. And I genuinely believe these days that, true wealth, the truly wealthy people in this world are the people who know the value of love and gratitude and counting our blessings and all the rest of the metaphors, if you like, that, atypical English people are less inclined to do so today, but there's still a bit of a hardcore that say things like, oh, that's all airy-fairy rubbish. It's not. The wealthiest man in the cemetery is going out the same way as he came in, naked and penniless. And the legacy that I now know that I want to leave behind for my family, particularly my kids and our grandkids, is one of love and trust and honesty and respect and gratitude. They know that all the things that matter in life are not how many Christmas presents they get. And for me, planting those seeds worldwide, I said to somebody the other day, I consider myself now to be a catalyst for change. I plant a seed for me, metaphorically, is a thought. I will plant a thought and then watch it grow. I might have to water it from time to time. I going back to the educator that I'm working with, had I needed to explore that situation further, I would have nurtured her to the point that I was making her think about the type of angle I was coming from. It's not about the money. Yeah, we all need to live. We all need to feed ourselves and pay the bills and all the rest of it. But for me, the seeds I'm planting, honestly, hand on heart, every Facebook post I put out, every article I write for anybody else, I'm planting seeds of hope, if you like. Hope on my part that at some point in the future, they will come to understand what I meant if they don't get what I'm talking about at that point. And moving further down the line, they may use me to help them effect that change in their life, but if not me, somebody else. So the seeds we plant today grow the oak trees of tomorrow. And I very firmly believe that, because seeds, if we equate seeds to thoughts, seeds have to germinate. Our thoughts have to germinate. And yeah, it's easy to say, yep, I can do that. I can throw myself out of an aeroplane. That seed that I planted 6 months prior to jumping out of that aeroplane, by the time I was sat on the edge of that aeroplane, waiting to drop, I'd spent 6 months nurturing that seed of thought that I could do whatever I wanted to do, and that included jumping out of an aeroplane. And it's my mission, if you like now, Kevin, to help people, whoever wants to listen to me, to do exactly the same thing. I will plant these seeds, and if people are able to nurture themselves and help themselves to grow and live and learn and grow further, magic. That's an absolute bonus. If they need my help, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that, but neither do I have a problem if they want to go it on alone or go somewhere else. Plant the seed, let the thought germinate, and see where it takes us. Essentially is how I live my life today.
This is pretty advanced stuff for who is, by my count, somewhere around 6 years old now.
Yes, absolutely.
I think maybe just under 6 or just over 6.
Bless you, you remembered. Yes, I'll be 6 on the 5th of September.
I'm going to assume that there will be some people that will listen to this that haven't heard our first conversation, which I certainly encourage people to go back and listen to. But one of the things that I just loved, and there was so much of that in that chat, Sue, that I did love, but I almost fell off my chair, and I guess I'll ask you to tell that story again really quickly, just because I think it really lends some context to the clarity that you're sharing with us now about how far into your life that you really got, not being able to have a conversation like what we're having right now at all, or really anything close to it, and how in just almost 6 years you have been able to steer yourself toward being the person that is talking to me right now. But can you just really quickly tell that story, give the context about, I think it was at that time that you were, give me a break, it was only 4 years old. Fill in the blanks for me.
I've had so many since we last spoke. I can't remember which one you're talking about now, to be perfectly honest. Give me a clue.
Somebody had challenged something that you were saying, and I think you had mentioned that at the time you were, if you don't mind me saying, 52 or somewhere in there.
Yes, I was.
And you responded with, give me a break, I'm only...
Yeah.
4.
Yeah, I mean, it's become a stock. It's become a stock response, which is why I'm struggling to grasp that particular instance. But essentially, yeah, I will say to people, both who know me and who don't know me, but the people who don't know me that I use it on look at me. They do look at me gone out. To be fair, I did have an instance not so long ago, and I'd stood up. I was giving a presentation, and I made a mistake. I did. Clearly, I made a mistake, and it was a slip of the tongue. And somebody in the audience pulled me up, and as fast as a bullet, if you like, I just turned around and went, "Just give me a break, will you? I'm only 5." and this lady looked at me. She went, "Excuse me?" She really wasn't impressed. A, because I'd made a mistake, and B, because she thought I was being sarcastic. But I hadn't got to the point in my story whereby she would understand what I meant. So for the uninitiated, at 52 years old, having been told that I was 24 hours away from dying, thanks to my alcoholism, clearly I defined the offer. But having been told that I was dying and didn't, 26th September every year now is my unbirthday, which is what you were referring to, my 6th birthday, and I am living and learning every single day, and I make mistakes. I put leaded petrol in my vehicle not so long ago, and it takes diesel, and it was an awful mistake, and it cost a lot of money to put right, and the person that helped me out at great personal cost told me off somewhat, and he got the same story. Give me a break. What do you expect from a 5-year-old? And I actually use it quite a lot, and it gets me out of quite a bit of trouble, to be fair. But I actually do believe that my life began again when I was fortunate enough not to die, and I do quite literally regard myself metaphorically as 5 years old, coming up 6 years old, because I've learned to look at life through the eyes of a child, I guess is where that comes from, Kevin. As you know, I'm surrounded by children and grandchildren in this family, and I take great pleasure now in looking at the world through their eyes. And I love being able to turn it around on people who get cross with me because I'm not perfect, and just knock it back to them. And I can often be heard to say, to be fair, give me a break. Give me a break. And this year it will be, give me a break. I'm not 6 while September. I tweak it a little bit. I tweak it a little bit year on year, but I think I'll get some mileage out of it for some time. Because I'm going to be a bit like Peter Pan. I don't intend to grow up now. I grew up once and I didn't like it very much. So I'm going to stay eternally young.
Yeah, growing up's overrated. But
absolutely.
I really wanted to make sure that we readdress that, because another one of the things that I suppose I could put in the column of excuses, and it's one that I used for myself when I had my own unbirthday, was I'm too old, or there's not enough time, or I can't change, which really is just a little bollocks, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's a large part of what I do these days, in certainly the workshops that I now roll out for myself. I literally start 65 million years ago. We are hardwired as human beings. We are hardwired to be able to fight or fly. The fight or flight response, it's there. We're not born afraid. People think we're born afraid. We're not. We're born with the ability to be afraid. You think about it, in the Western world, when a child is born, maybe not so much these days, but certainly when I was born, I don't know about you in America, but in this country, they hoist you up by the ankles and they slap you on the backside. And the first thing one of the reasons, apart from checking that you're alive, one of the reasons that that's done is to subconsciously trigger the fight and flight response. The responses that we have in that fight flight are the fear of being startled, which would indicate loud noises, and the fear of falling, not height, the fear of falling, but it indicates height. So they yank you up in the air and they slap you on the backside. Bingo. You think you're going to fall. Somebody smacked you. It startled you. That's your subconscious triggered. It's not a permission to grow up being afraid of everything. The fear is born when we attach emotional pain points to significant memory. If I'd have known that when I was a child, you know what? My life would have been so different. And it's why I'm passionate about doing what I do with kids these days. I'm working with kids now who truly believe, one lad in particular, truly believes he can be a Jedi warrior. But you know what? That's all he needs. He needs to believe that he can, and he needs me to believe that he can. But more importantly now, he's got parents and teachers who mirror his belief back to him. Whether or not that's their belief or not is almost irrelevant. Mirror it back to the child. If we can get it right with the kids in our lives, with the young peoples in our lives, Kevin, if they can grow up to know that fear of making a mistake isn't a problem, because the fear of making a mistake would indicate that everybody's successful. Not one person on this planet ever became successful without making a single mistake. Not one. You know, the fear of the opinions of other people. Wake up. Their opinions, they're not facts. They're entitled to their opinion. Doesn't make it a fact. You can thank them for their input. I can see why you would think that. However, we'll have to agree to disagree. You know? And a stock one, Byron Katie uses it a lot. Is that true? It stops them. It would stop a raging bull. You know, somebody is horrible to you because they've got an opinion about you that's unfounded. Is that true? I've got a very good personal friend to thank for that analogy, because she introduced me to Byron Katie, but it's so simple and it's so effective. The things we grow up as children, we're born with innate behaviours. That's the things that we're naturally genetically predisposed to do. Our behaviours are learned. We learn most of what we know as an adult that we need in our lives, we know by the age of 5. Everything else is education. And that includes learned behaviour. Fears of failure, change, lack, spiders, whatever, you've got an emotional pain point. If you are frightened of something, you have an emotional pain point, and it's not always easy. And very often you can't even remember the cause. Or if you have a self-limiting belief, I know, this is me speaking personally, I know I am rubbish at drawing. It's a fact. I draw stickmen. That's all I can do, and I'm rubbish. I now know, Kevin, and this has happened since the last time we spoke, I know now without a shadow of a doubt that the reason I will tell everybody and anybody, including myself, I can't draw, the very first good hiding I remember as a child, and I mean a good hiding, was because I'd drawn something inappropriately on a very expensive piece of furniture with a very sharp instrument. I managed to get a real hiding for it. But guess what I grew up thinking? I can't draw. I can't draw. I never forgot that hiding. I was 2 years old. I never forgot that hiding. And the person that gave me that hiding was the reason that I hung my hat of mental health on their coat peg. Learned behaviour. It doesn't matter what people say to us. It doesn't matter what people do to us. We'll forget largely everything along those lines, but we'll never, ever, ever forget how they make us feel. And that's whether that's you're a child or you're speaking to somebody in the checkout queue at the supermarket or whatever, we learn the behaviours that either lead us towards going through to live our lives looking through the window of opportunity, or lead us down the path of looking through the window of fear. And I was 52 years old when I actually realised there was even a different window. Yeah? Hence why I'm only nearly 6.
You've several times in this conversation brought it right around to exactly what I was going to ask you about. And as we finish up our time here together for this conversation, you've done it again. And that was the effect that we have on others, and more specifically, you mentioned a few minutes ago about your grandkids and the young people around you. and how you make them feel. And I'm wondering what you think the effect has been and is being for them, not just in how they feel around you, but what you think is being the result of observing the incredible transformation that their grandmother, their mother, and some of the other people that are in your family have observed. How do you think that that's influencing or affecting them?
I think, well, firstly, of the 6 grandchildren that we've got, 3 of them don't know me any other way than this. That's crazy, isn't it? I wouldn't have seen the youngest 3. I would never, ever have met them. The older 3, the oldest of the 6 is only 15. So sort of 5 years ago, she would have been 10. She's probably the one that would remember most. But she just remembers me being fat, to be fair. But the kids, the older grandkids particularly, will ring up for conversations. They will ask advice and so on. And I'm happy, I'm pleased that they want to do so. Our own children, my kids they're all grown-ups in their own right. I know they're proud of the mother they've got now. I think they've always loved the mother they've ever had. They're proud of the mother that they've got now. But at the minute, because they are grown-ups, one's 32, one's in her 40s, and one's in her mid-20s, I am now that sort of mother that does a Byron Katie from time to time. Is that true? So they look at me and go, oh God. They know they've got nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. But I think I can, hand on heart, say that I am equally as proud of how they've turned out as grown-ups, as they are of me, I hope, as in my new incantation, even though they've got a mother that's 6. But they are, I think, essentially, they've got the grounding that I'm pleased to have been able to give them. We, as parents, are pleased to have been able to give them. But they also know that this is their journey. I don't want them to walk in my footsteps, Kevin. I don't. I want them to, if they're ever in a position where they feel the need to, for instance, descend into a destructive habit like alcoholism, I want them to know that they can talk to us at any time. And they do know that. But until it happens, you're never really quite sure as a parent. You can lead them, can't you? You can lead a horse to water. You can't make it drink. But I don't want them to follow in my footsteps. I want them to walk by my side all the way and learn from my mistakes in such a way that had I had similar guidance, shall we say, then things could have been different. But where I fell down was not taking responsibility. My kids, as grown up as they are, don't like the uncomfortable conversations that I make us have, which is about them taking responsibility for their choices and their consequences of their actions. You know, and as you'll know from 16 months ago, we had a conversation which was, if we don't make a choice, hello, you're still making a choice. So now I've elevated the pitch a little bit by turning it around slightly to make them understand that if they're in a difficult spot, they do need to make it. They do need to make a choice, but then they need to make it the right choice. I think more than anything, I think what they've learned is that we can't please everybody, ever. We can't. So sometimes we need to make a decision that's right for us, because in trying to make a decision that's right for everybody else, it makes us and them miserable. So I think they are, they're proud of me. They know that we're proud of them, for sure. But I would hope that when it comes to the point that I do actually succumb and leave this mortal coil, that they will actually look back, like I said previously, and if I leave them all the riches in the world or nothing at all, I would hope that they would remember that it's life's intangibles are what make us wealthy.
Sue, I'm so glad that I had the I'm looking for the right word. That I overcame my excuses of why I couldn't or shouldn't be reaching out to people that didn't know me, which I ended up having to do when I started this podcast, and it has led me to friends literally from around the world. We laughed before we had this conversation about you referring to me as your transatlantic buddy on Facebook. Yeah. And it's almost inconceivable for me to think that we didn't know each other at some point, and I quite look forward to the next conversation, which I hope and expect will be in person as I continue to stretch my boundaries and you continue to stretch yours. And in the process, you inspire me, you motivate me, you've affected my life in more positive ways than you can imagine, and I just want to thank you so sincerely, not just for your time here today, but for what you're doing and for being such a great friend and a real lighthouse in the world. And I hope that this inspires even just one other person to go out and shine like they know they can. Thanks so much, Sue.
You're more than welcome. And I hope so too, because you know what? It's as a final, a last thought, if you like, that we time we spend on this planet, Kevin, is relatively short. We are all born. We all die. It's what we do in the time in between that counts. And there isn't any shame in stuffing it up and getting it wrong. There isn't. It doesn't matter how long it takes us to get to where we're meant to be, just as long as we get there.
You can connect with Sue Curr at her website, which is www.suecurr.com. S-U-E. Her last name is C-U-R-R. 2 R's at the end of Curr. SueCurr.com. You'll find all her social channel links there, and at the blog post for this particular episode, which is number 69. You can find Sue on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram, and LinkedIn. She's easy to find if you can remember her name and you have access to the internet. SueCurr.com. Now, if you liked this episode, I'm quite sure that you're going to like, episode 23, which also features Sue. But in that episode, she gives us the whole backstory of what I mentioned at the outset of this episode. The battle with mental health, descension into alcoholism, coming to terms with what her life was going to look like if she didn't make significant changes and whether or not it was even going to continue. But I certainly encourage you to go and listen back to that conversation. If you like this one, you're going to love that one because it's another hour of Sue Curr. You'll also like episode 45 with my friend Steve Zanella. That one is Overcoming Anxiety, and Steve gives a completely transparent and vulnerable account of his journey and his battle with mental health and anxiety, and what are the things that he has done to acknowledge it, to own it, and to overcome it, and to re-engineer his life into an experience that he's excited to wake up to every day. That's a really powerful episode, number 45. And episode 54 also came to mind with Tanya Adlita. It's called The Balancing Act of a Well-Lived Life. And the reason why Tanya's episode came to my mind was because I remember there were a number of stories that she told in that podcast about realizing and confronting times in her life where she shrank from herself, where she responded to other people or met a situation in the way that she thought perhaps the other people wanted or the situation warranted, but it wasn't really in line with who she really was, and she wasn't honoring her true self. So it was really interesting to hear her talk about discovering that, then owning it, and then changing it. Episode 54 with Tanya Adlita, The Balancing Act of a Well-Lived Life. You can find those on all past episodes of this podcast anywhere around the world on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, and at No Schedule Man Podcast. If you're in the United States, you can also find it on the iHeartRadio feed and on Google Play Music. If you'd like to connect with me, just look for No Schedule Man on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or Twitter, or visit me at kevinbulmer.com. NoScheduleMan.com will take you to the same place. You can learn more about my speaking, coaching, and other content there. To be a part of my online coaching community for daily access to me, encouragement, empowerment, and creative collaboration, visit theturtletribe.com. It's a special place, and we'd love to have you. Thanks again for listening. If you found this helpful, please subscribe and tell a friend. I hope to have you both here again for the next episode of Journeys with the No Schedule Man.
Just a little deja